Alright, we're going to begin with a formula. It's a shortcut for finding the sum of an arithmetic series. So if we're adding the first n terms, we're going to have n times the sum of the first term and the last term divided by 2. So you don't need to know any of the terms in the middle. So let's look at example 1. My first term is 8. My difference is -3, and that matters because I don't know my last term, and I need to know my last term. And n is 20. This was given right there. So let's begin with finding the last term. So we have first term plus the difference times n minus 1, n is 20, so that's 19. 8 minus 57, -49. And so we're just going to substitute into our formula. So we have 20 terms, and divide by 2, and add the first term and the last term. Now I like to cancel whenever I can. And that gives me 10 times -41. And my sum of the first 20 terms is -410, which is a lot quicker than finding the first 20 terms and then adding them together. Now, here I'm given sigma notation, and what sigma notation allows us to do is to find the first term and the last term. This is n. So we're just going to substitute n equals 1. Substitute n equals 16. And we have our first and last term. And so for the sum of our first 16 terms, we have 16 terms. Add our first term and our last term. Divide by 2. And again, I like to cancel whenever I can. So 8 times -20 gives me a sum of -160. Okay, let's do another one. This one, we have all the information. It's just a matter of substituting. So n is 10. Divide by 2. And add our first term and our last term. So if we simplify, we get 5 times 303. And that's 15. Alright, so here's my first term. My difference is 8, and I need to know my difference because I don't know my 20th term. So I need the difference to find the 20th term. So remember, the 20th term is the first term, plus the difference, times n minus 1, and that's 19. And we get this all plugged in, you get 155. So we're going to substitute in 20 on top, 2 on the bottom, add our 2 numbers in the middle, so 158, divide 20 by 2, and this gives us 1,580. Alright, the sum of a geometric series involves the ratio. You always begin with the first term, and we're going to multiply 1 minus r raised to the n power divided by 1 minus r, and we need to be very careful. This n is only raised to the r, not 1 minus r. So let's begin with substituting. So we have sum of the first 10 terms, 1, and then 1 minus, and our ratio is negative, so it needs to go in parentheses, raised to the 10th, over 1 minus -2. So we're going to simplify this. We have a 1 minus, you're raising a negative 2 to the 10th power. So in your calculator, you would enter in parentheses like this. And you would get a positive 1024. The bottom becomes 3. And you have negative 1023 over 3, and that actually divides evenly to make negative 341. Now our next example is going to involve a ratio that is a negative and a fraction. And so let's look at what the series would be. If we begin with j is equal to 1, you have a negative 1/2. If j is 2, you've got a positive 1/4. And then you end up with a sequence that looks like this. Your ratio, if you divide these, is negative 1/2. What you see in this parentheses, this is your ratio. And this is T1. And so that's all the information we need besides n, which is the last number on your sigma. So if you remember, here's our formula. And the fraction is going to be a little bit messy, but that's okay. So our first term, negative 1/2, you have 1 minus, and since your ratio is negative, it really needs to go in parentheses. And then 1 minus negative 1/2 in the denominator. So we have negative 1/2, and then in our parentheses, distribute your power to negative 1 and negative 2. And that gives us a fraction of 1 over 1024. And then divided by 3/2. Now, inside the parentheses is what we're concerned with at the moment. We need to find a common denominator, and that common denominator is 1024. And you also need to add, well, I've already done that, add those denominators right there. Okay, so let's start simplifying. Inside the second parentheses, we end up with 1023 over 1024. And when you divide by a fraction, that's the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. So we're just going to flip that over and multiply. And I want to cancel. So cancel, cancel, cancel. And this was 341. And this fraction no longer simplifies anymore. So this will be the sum of this series. I've got a couple of word problems for you. We're dealing with a water hose that's coiled up, and it says each loop is 6 inches longer. Okay, we're adding 6 each time. That's my difference. And it says the innermost loop is 18. So that's my first term. And there are 15 loops. And that is how many terms. Now, this is an arithmetic sequence, so I need to know the length of the 15th loop. So we're going to substitute in. And n minus 1 is 14. And so I need to figure out how long this is, and the outside loop is 102 inches long. And so now I want to find the sum of all 15 loops. So I've got 18 plus my difference, and I am doing the nth term formula, so let's fix that. So the number of loops, 15, divided by 2. And I'll add my first one and my last one. And this time, because I have an odd number of loops, I can't really add those together. So I've got, or cancel that. So I've got 15 times 120 divided by 2. and that gives me a length of 900 inches for my hose. Now the last one is about my electric bill, and we're going to begin with an initial value of $300. Now let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. Now if my cost increased by 10%, that means I start with 300, I'm adding 30. So 330. And then my third term is that one, and then I'm adding 330 or 33. Okay, and that should give me enough. Well, this isn't arithmetic, this is a geometric. If we divide 330 divided by 300, and then 363 divided by 330, you're going to get 1.1, and this is the rate. And my n is the difference in my years. So this is 14. Alright, so we will have our first term, and then 1 minus my ratio raised to the 14th power, and then 1 minus my ratio again. Now I'm actually going to put this whole thing into my calculator at one time. So I'm beginning actually by multiplying, raising my 1.1 to the 14th, subtracting that from 1. It gives me a negative. And then I'm going to multiply that by 300. And then I'm going to divide that whole thing through by negative 0.1. And this gives me a total of $8,392.50.